If you're anything like me, your shop is full of poorly organized scrap wood. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for saving every offcut imaginable because you really never know what's going to make or break your next project. But what I am tired of is letting the scrap wood take over my workspace. So welcome to my lumber storage cart build, AACBANO edition. Let's get started.
Was that good? Was it good? Okay.
If you watched my last video, you'll remember that my garage was plagued by this massive, inefficient storage cabinet. It really gave us a run for our money getting it down off the wall, and it was covered in crusty old carpet. But underneath it all, the 3/4 inch ply was actually still in decent shape, so in the name of AACBANO and any axe hole can buy a new one, I knew I had to make something out of it. With the lumber ready to go, I had to start thinking about the cart itself and what I needed it to do for me. The 3 must-haves that I landed on for this project are: 1. It must have mixed storage for both dimensional lumber and sheet goods. 2. It must be mobile. And 3. It must be made primarily out of scrap wood. That last must-have is mainly added in there as a challenge to myself, to learn how to design under stricter confines, and also to lean into the AACBANO motto to make use of what I already have. Any axe hole can buy a new one, otherwise shortened to AACBANO, is a saying that's been passed down in my family for generations, and one that my grandpa lived by. While his version of the saying wasn't quite so PG, let's just say his rendition included a different kind of a-hole, the sentiment was the same. In a world rife with disposable, mass-produced products built basically out of cardboard, why not learn to fix it or build it yourself? Besides, someone out there knows how, so why can't that someone be you? With that in mind, here's the design I landed on. The cart will consist of 2 rows of cubbies for shorter pieces, a set of long, narrow shelves for longer dimensional lumber, and a space at the back for larger sheet goods. You might notice this build looks a little too big for the materials I have, and you'd be right. I decided to make this work best for me and my shop, I needed to add those shelves for horizontal storage. Unfortunately, that meant buying an additional sheet of plywood, but I figured I needed to build this right the first time around so I don't have to redo it down the line and waste more material in the process. So here you can see me cutting that full sheet of ply down into the 2 sides that will make up those shelves. Then I pulled my first piece back out. This will be the bottom of my lumber cart, and you can see it already has a 3/4 inch dado cut into it from holding one of the original cabinet shelves. I'm going to make use of that in this build, so I cleaned it up and did a quick dry test with my other pieces to make sure everything would fit nicely together. Then it was time to make my own dados for the shelves. I marked out where I wanted everything to sit and then put my router to work cutting them out. I started by using my plastic level as a fence, but pretty soon realized it really wasn't strong enough for that and I was wandering off of my cut line. So I swapped it out for something stronger and finished off my dados. Then I came back in and sanded the edges of my cuts down to keep everything nice and clean. And after a quick but necessary dance break, it was time to move on to the glue up. The first step was to slot the tall cubby wall into the existing dado on the cart bottom. I used a couple of pieces of scrap wood to hold everything square while it dried, and then threw a few screws into the underside for good measure. At this point, I had to consult my design to remind myself which leftover cabinet plywood I was going to cut the shelves out of. I did this a fair bit throughout the build since I only had a select amount of material to work with. Before I started the build, I numbered my cut list and gave corresponding numbers to the plywood I was using, so I could keep track of which piece would be cut from what. I also tried to work from my largest to smallest cuts, so I wouldn't risk running out of material in the end. I put a 5-degree angle on the blade before cutting these shelves down to their final width. The sheet wall will also sit at a 5-degree angle to allow the sheet goods to lean back against the wall for easier storage. But before I could get anything assembled, I needed to get the cart into position, which turned out to be a little bit tricky by myself. Luckily, I had the RFS box, named after my grandpa's initials, in the shop with me. This is a box made for my grandpa by his grandpa, and it's been in every shop my grandfather ever had, so I'm very fortunate to have it in my shop now as well. The shelves will be secured into the dados by a combination of wood glue and screws through the back. It sounds easy enough, but this is actually where a few things started to go wrong.
We got a dilemma. So basically, I cut all these dados to 3/4 of an inch because that's what the plywood is. I forgot to account for the fact that this specific board has another extra 1/8 of an inch or so of some kind of like sheeting on top of it. So I already put all the glue in because I dry fit these pieces, but not this specific board. Mistake number 1. Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna wipe the glue out of the dado and widen it a bit. That's my only real option.
So I pulled my sander out again and gave myself a little more wiggle room to work with. Even though it was still pretty tight, I found that adding a screw to secure everything early on really helped keep things lined up and square. Then I just went ahead and did that 3 more times, stopping to sand where needed and really making use of those screws to keep everything in place. Next up, I moved on to adding the casters. I struggled to figure out when in the process to add these. The longer I waited, the harder it was going to be to get the cart into position to add them because it would be heavier, but the earlier I put them on, the longer I would have to fight against the whole thing trying to roll away from me as I finished the build. In the end, I decided to go ahead and add them when everything was nicely positioned like this and just work to combat the roll down the line. It's a bit hard to tell on camera, but once the cart was right side up again, I noticed some bowing happening in the center. I knew it was only going to get worse the more weight I added on, so I threw an extra caster on either side to help distribute the weight better before moving forward. Turning my attention back to the sheet wall, I cut a slight 5-degree angle along the bottom edge to allow it to lean back against the shelves for easier storage. But let's just say that didn't go exactly to plan.
Okay, so shelves are all in. It's nice and stable now on the bottom with those additional casters. But the next problem has arisen. I designed this panel here to lean back on a 5-degree angle, and I forgot that because this is on a 5-degree angle, each one of these shelves would need to get progressively narrower and narrower, and I didn't do that. They are all cut to 10.5 inches, and honestly at this point I am worried that if I try and cut them properly to get that 5-degree lean, I'm gonna end up cutting them too short and have a big problem. So I think the way that I'm gonna move forward on this is just accept my losses and lean this pretty well at a 90-degree angle. And then to ensure that any pieces that I lean against it don't just fall off because they don't have any kind of backwards tilt to them, I'll just add like a bungee cord or something around this to keep them nice and secure. So I'm just gonna push forward with this and we're gonna make it work.
While this solve definitely wasn't perfect, I had to keep reminding myself that the only purpose of this project is to hold wood in the garage, and these slight imperfections don't impede that purpose, so honestly, there's nothing to worry about. Continuing on, it was time to add the 2 rows of cubbies, starting with the taller dividers. I cut them to size, took the corner off for better access, and then pulled out my Craig pocket jig to add some pocket holes. I've owned this jig for a while, but never actually used it before, and I was really surprised by how easy it was. The only trouble I ran into was, even though it was nicely clamped up, it kept shifting around while I was drilling. So if you have any tips to avoid that, let me know in the comments below. Attaching these dividers to the build was pretty simple thanks to these pocket holes. But after I got them on, I realized I probably should have added a few more pocket holes to the back side of the dividers, so I didn't have to stick my hand into the shelves at an awkward angle and try and guess where to drive a screw to secure the back. Eventually though, I did get everything secured and moved on to installing the middle cubby wall. I had two pieces that were just the right length, but only half of the height for what I wanted for this, so I just stacked them together to make this divider piece. Securing the short cubby dividers, I learned from my previous mistake and added 2 pocket holes to the bottom, plus one on the backside to make my life easier. I finished off the cubbies with this short wall to close everything in, and then added the sheet lip to the backside. I found these ring hooks in one of the boxes left behind from my grandpa, and they were exactly what I needed to secure the sheet goods on the back. I went ahead and added those onto either end of the cart, and then clipped in a bungee cord to secure everything. This bungee cord is great because it actually has carabiners on either end instead of a hook, so it gives a nice positive lock on everything and keeps it all secure as I roll it around. And with that final touch, there was only one thing left to do.
Okay, so now it's time to get this. And this. Plus all of this. And even more scrap that I have kicking around. It's time to get it into the cart and put this thing to work. And there you have it, my finished lumber storage cart, AACBANO edition. I'm super proud of how this turned out. I think it's gonna make a huge difference in the shop to have all my scrap pieces in one place. It definitely needs a little bit more attention and TLC for the organizing, but I think that's something that I'm gonna pick up as time goes on and I start to use it more and get used to it. But overall, super proud and happy with how this turned out. Thank you so much for watching. Happy building, and I'll see you in the next one.